So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Janine, and I am the PR lead here at Meetups. Super excited to have you and excited to have this great chat on establishing a new normal in corporate culture during this pandemic with our CEO, David Siegel. And as you've seen already and heard from our two guest moderators, Marty Katz and Raphi Salem. I'm quickly going to go over the guidelines and the agenda, and then I'm going to pass it on to our two guest moderators and David. So for our guidelines, so video. This event will be recorded, but don't worry, you're not going to appear in the video. Since the event is recorded, we will be sharing it with everyone on our blog. You can sign up, meetup.com/blog. And everyone is also muted. It is a courtesy. So if you're trying to speak and you can't, don't worry, it is not broken. It's just a courtesy to have everyone muted during the event. With that said, we do love to hear from you. So if you have any comments or would like to say hi, continue saying hi, please do so on the chat. And if you have any questions, we encourage you to please submit your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So again, we love to hear from you. So please submit your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen for David to answer towards the end of this event. And I'm briefly going to go over the agenda. So Marty and Raphi will do a brief introduction. Then they will kick off the conversation with David Siegel, followed by Q&A session. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Marty and Raphi.
Thank you, Janine, very much. First, I want to say that Raphi and I are not only people who are professionals in the marketing area, but we also are people who have a group on Meetup. We're organizers of BizDev Leaders, and BizDev Leaders is a group we meet twice a month, and we bring together people who are business development leaders who are interested in expanding their understanding of messaging and branding, as well as an opportunity to meet other business development executives throughout the world. So that's our group. And for me personally, I'm a messaging and branding consultant. I'm the founder of Connectors 360, and I work with business leaders who are interested in burnishing their message so they can enhance their sales leads. Raphi?
Thank you. As I like to call it, you call it BizDev Leaders. I like to call it the Raphi and Marty Show, or sometimes the Marty and Raphi Show. And this is the second time that we've actually had David Siegel on the Raphi and Marty Show, even though now it's sort of like we're on the Meetup Show. So I've been in digital marketing for over 20 years. I've known David Siegel for over 10 years. And I actually wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, David, and thank you, Marty, for coming together again. The interesting thing is that when we met in April, David, there were a bunch of things. This was not in the prep, so I hope you're ready for what I'm about to ask you. When we met in April, I was asking you how, number one, how you felt about working from home, because you traveled a lot. You were really traveling all over the world, really. So one thing that you answered was that you were wearing shorts indoors every single day. Has anything changed about your attire since you started?
Perhaps that answers the question as I get a little red in the face.
Okay. So
there are certainly plenty of negatives to working at home, but one of them is the dress code. And let's just say having an excuse to wear my Meetup very comfy t-shirt is and shorts.
Yes. So that was question number one, and I didn't throw you off. Question number two, since we've been working from home for the past 2 to 3 months, have you noticed your behavior online in the Zoom conferences? Like, have you noticed anything in your teeth? Like after you've been after you have done a Zoom, did you realize like, oh no, I had like a piece of hot dog still on my, like, have you noticed anything? What tips can you give people to be Zoom prepared?
Well, I would tell you that just a minute before this one, I actually went to the bathroom and I quickly brushed my teeth.
Yes.
It's not even a joke. Just to make sure, because I had a very late lunch about 10 minutes ago. But you know, I think the biggest thing for me is Zoom has become both a blessing and a curse. I'm both more comfortable and I feel like I'm having a quote unquote more real conversation on Zoom with people now, but at the same time, I also have far more Zoom fatigue than I ever had in kind of in-person fatigue. And it's what's been fascinating, not to go too much on this, but I had some crazy thing happen to me yesterday, and it was called a phone call. I know, crazy, right? And I had not had a phone call in so long. And I sat outside and I did a phone call, and I was like, wow, that was a beautiful experience. So I think my point is that it's good to mix things up, and there's some kind of power to having a phone call and not actually seeing people at times as well. So something to think about.
Perfect segue into, forget about what's on your face. Has anything been in your background that has been embarrassing on any Zoom calls?
Besides my 19-year-old who oftentimes walks into the room at 1 o'clock in the afternoon after he just woke up, without a shirt and possibly in his boxer shorts, happening almost every day. Besides that, nothing really.
All right, I'm done with the non-prep questions. We can jump into the program now. Thanks again.
Thank God.
So I want to thank you, Raphi, for that extended and wonderful introduction, and it's particularly to the Marty and Raphi show. And as Raphi did mention a couple of months ago, David was kind enough to join us for our Biz Dev Leaders and talked about a number of subjects that we were facing early on in the pandemic. And we got a lot of very good responses and inquiries. And out of this, we came up with this idea, Raphi and I, to invite David back to talk about issues that impact leadership, because this is an unprecedented time. Everybody knows that. But there are a lot of questions about leadership that are really vital, more important than the day-to-day kinds of activities that we're all involved in. How do we function? And so we're going to go through a couple of questions here, and I'm going to start off by talking about communications. And David will, let us know his point of view and see what we have to say. So after months apart, many people are exhausted and confused and by often contradictory messages from government, public health, medical, and scientific communities. The question is, how can leaders forge a consistent and reliable message for their teams during this time?
Wait, so Marty, you're actually saying that there's been inconsistent messaging?
Actually, I am saying that. Can you believe it?
So there's, not to minimize, obviously, the seriousness of the pandemic, but there is a particularly humorous Saturday Night Live and other skits around it. People saying something, mimicking the presentations by different government officials, and saying things like, very important to be 6 feet away, but at the same time, you also have to be 20 feet away. Very important to make sure you wear a mask, but the mask won't actually do anything. And there's a good play on the inconsistencies of actual words that exist out there. So it's definitely incredibly hard for a leader. And the point is, all participants on this conversation are all leaders. Every single person here is a leader. You're a meetup organizer, and that makes you an incredibly important leader. And everything that I'm hopefully going to share with you, hopefully think about the relevancy both for your meetup group, but as importantly for your personal life and as well as maybe professional life. So the first thing I would say in answering your question around kind of a reliable message is that the messaging and communication always starts with a lot of the pre-work that has to happen prior to the message. And it's not about the message, it's about the pre-work that you do to make the message as consistent, as reliable and effective as possible. So I kind of want to share with you some of the things that we're doing at Meetup specifically around the preparation for the message in order to enable the message to be as effective as it can. Sound okay?
Yes.
Here we go. So first, I have like a 5-part thing of things that we're doing. Number one, I won't bore you with PowerPoint, so you could just, take mental notes. Number one is step one is listening in terms of message. So it's important to listen to your meetup group, listen to the people on your team, listen to the people in your organization, understand their fears, understand their concerns, understand how some of them are data-driven and some of them are more emotional, psychological-driven. So at Meetup, what we did is we started off with a kind of a large employee survey with a lot of different scenarios, and just to understand and listen to our employee population around what their concerns are. So think about how you can use Meetup and different polls on Meetup, just listen to understand people's needs. The second step I would say after listening is collaboration. And what I mean by that is that you have a leadership team within your Meetup, or you have a leadership team in your organization as a leader. You can't just listen and then act as a leader. You need to listen and then really spend time with one's leadership team to collaborate on what the right message will ultimately be. So it's listening, step one. Step two is collaboration. Step three, in my mind, is kind of understanding that the best thing that you could do as a leader in creating a message for your organization or your team around everything happening with COVID and what to do is trying to figure out how to build flexibility into the process. And in this situation, I would say more than any other situation, flexibility is really important, because the gamut of people's fears, justifiable concerns, and experiences and life situations, whether they're compromised or non-compromised, are just in a really enormous gamut. So in thinking about what the right message is for your Meetup group or for your company, it's how can we build flexibility into whatever suggestions that we have. So for example, what we're doing at Meetup is we're not forcing everyone to come back to our corporate office. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to, actually starting later this week in a couple of days, we're going to have 3 locations set up throughout Brooklyn and Manhattan, and tell people that it's finding locations that are closer to where they happen to live, so it's easier to avoid transit systems, etc. And they could choose to go or not go with whatever flexibility that they need in order to take advantage of having a space to be able to go to get out of whatever the challenging situation might be at home, and get back to meeting with people in person. So what I would say is really emphasizing flexibility in process is the third. I'll go to the last 2 very quickly. The fourth, to me, in messaging, before getting to the message, over communication. So we literally have a weekly all hands meeting. Every other week it's optional, and every other week it's kind of mandatory for all of our employees. And we talk about kind of what the right get back to work kind of policies are, and we're just over communicating as much as possible and willing to pivot based on new information. And the last is finally the message. So it's like the way to be successful in a message is not to come up with a message. The way to be successful in a message is to first listen, then collaborate among the most important people in the leadership team, then ensure you have a flexible process, then make sure you're over communicating. And then finally, the message that we are doing at Meetup is we were very clear. We said, we don't know when we're going to get back to the office. It'll likely be sometime in Q4. These are the things, however, that need to happen in order for us to say yes about getting back to the office and getting back in person. We need to have, for example, the school system has to be up and running again, so that it's easier for anyone who's a parent to be able to work there, to be able to get into the office. And there's a list of 4, 5, 6 things that we have that have to happen, and it's fairly clear. And that's my answer on kind of messaging. And sorry I went on for so long. I just cared a lot about that topic.
That's totally okay. So segueing into management and internal office procedures. How can management assure their employees that they're providing that safe environment? People are freaking. I have a spectrum of friends. People that do not care. They're not anti-masker, but they don't really think that they're going to get COVID, and they think that they're invincible. To friends who literally have not seen their parents in months because they're afraid of hurting them. So how can management assure their employees that they are providing the safest places to go back to work to?
Right. I mean, I think the first step, thanks, Raphi, and your example is great. And I think every single person, all hundreds of you on the call, face this, is acknowledging that you can't fully assure 100% of people. Like, step one in Alcoholics Anonymous is around like acknowledging that there's a challenge in the problem in the first place. It's like acknowledge that you can't fully assure 100% of people, and that's why flexibility is important. The reason why is because this is not something that's about data. It's not something about looking at the numbers. This is very emotional, psychological response, and some people are being not careful enough, and some people are being potentially overly careful, if you could be that. And I think the first step in my mind of creating a safe environment is understanding that you need to appeal to people's emotional and psychological needs, not just their rational kind of data-driven approach. Because if you just take a rational approach to it, it's not empathetic. And empathy needs to kind of lead the way. And the reason why I say that is because ultimately, as leaders, the number one most important thing you can facilitate around coming back to a safe environment is trust. Everything comes down to building trust. The more that you're able to build trust with the people that you're leading, whether it's in a meetup group or in your company, the more that you're able to help people to make the right decisions for themselves and for what they need. And so I would just say is focusing on individual needs, ensuring flexibility, understanding that it's not about rational based decisions, which it shouldn't be, and ensuring an empathetic approach, and finally just erring more on the side of caution, I think is also the final right approach. And that would be my kind of way of thinking about it.
Well, that makes a tremendous amount of sense, and I appreciate your diligence in addressing all of that. The next issue that we're taking a look is team dynamics and internal function. So after months of Zoom and online communications, like you just mentioned in your own life, how should leaders reflect on the changes that have occurred due to lack of direct contact among teams and between departments? And how can leaders recreate a sense of community again in the workplace?
Yeah,
and then to follow up, let me just give you the whole question, then you can respond to all of it, is what steps should be developed in response to these dynamics, and then how to implement?
Marty, aren't there like 6 more parts of that question?
That's a 3-part question, that's it.
You know, the best part about
the whole thing.
The best part about like a longish question is you could choose which part you want to focus on. So
pick whatever you like, David.
You're giving me definitely a gift there. I think I'll focus on the community side because I think we're all community leaders. Each one of us, Marty and Raphi, are definitely community leaders, and every person who's there is a community leader. And I think what might be helpful to reflect on around your question or questions, as you could say, is that community is of utmost priority. And what I wanted to sort of kind of share is 3 perhaps tactical things that you could do as community leaders, and 3 more kind of thinking about community from a more strategic standpoint. So tactically, so we use a great function on Slack, and it's called Coffee Buddies. It's kind of available within Slack, and it's almost like a speed dating service for people. And it allows for people to just get matched up once a week, you know, for a 30-minute conversation, for someone who you normally wouldn't have necessarily had an opportunity to get to know, and you're matched up with them. And community is about collective, but it's also about deep one-on-one type personal relationships, just like the 2 of you have with each other. And the more that we could do certain actions. So one example of a tool that I think is great is icebreaker or breakout rooms or coffee talk, shall we say, within Slack, of kind of having the one-on-one dialogue to facilitate community. The second is we've done a lot of meetup of game nights. We've done a lot of like Friday night, let's go out and drink together. Not actually in person, but we'll have like margaritas or whatever. We've done scavenger hunts. We've done a whole bunch of things to really build community that can be done in an online and remote fashion. And I think it's important to figure out how to be creative and to avoid the, shall we say, like the Brady Bunch, you know, set of 9 or set of 25 kind of Zoom experiences. Because the more that, you know, it's so artificial to have that 25 people all in one conversation thing. And the more that you could mimic real community, which is when you get into a room and you're networking or you're meeting people, you're in smaller groups of 2, 3, 4 people. So how do you kind of mimic that experience that exists within a community online. And that's where things like coffee talk or icebreaker or breakout rooms can be incredibly valuable. And then the last things that we're doing, actually, we're organizing this for in a couple of weeks. I don't even think Meetup employees know about this yet, but we're in New York, where it was a very difficult situation, and it's now becoming a safer, thank God, situation, specifically in New York City. And we're going to be setting up get-togethers in parks where people live that are optional. We're still going to ask people and really insist that people are social distancing from each other. But to say to our employees who live near Prospect Park in Brooklyn, hey, come to Prospect Park in Brooklyn, BYOB, bring your own beer, bring your own whatever, and just kind of get together in person in a safe way. It's just a way to facilitate community, not force people into it, and find safe ways to do in person outside is the last one. And now I'll kind of talk about kind of at a higher level community, which is, I've always said there's really 3 key elements to effective community building, which are irrespective of whether you're talking about online or you're talking about in person. All 3 of these dynamics are critical. And as leaders, I want you to think about how you could facilitate those 3. The first is something we've talked about already, which is trust. When you have trust in a community where people can trust each other, that what happens in the group stays in the group, shall we say, similar to, I saw someone's here is from Vegas. That's number 1 important. Number 2 is vulnerability. When communities are at their best, they allow people to be their vulnerable and true selves with each other. And as leaders, thinking about how you can help to build community back in your workplace, like Marty had asked about, and build vulnerability for people back in the workplace is a key component of community. And the third, kind of this is at a high level, not the tactical level, is continuity. Communities don't exist if it's a series of event, and it's different people at every one of those events. A meetup group is bigger than just a series of each events. And finding out and ensuring that there's continuity of people who are coming, but at the same time, there's new people that get brought into that community and that re-energize that community is incredibly important. So I gave some very tactical examples, but also just some kind of bigger, thoughtful things around kind of building a community back in the workplace around trust, vulnerability, and continuity.
Yeah, I think those are, I was going to say, those are great pillars upon which we can build community going forward.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, let's end it off with corporate culture. So, as you know, David, you've been, you and I have known each other for many years, and I know your resume and your background prior to Meetup. So, you've been in a number of different corporate cultures. So, corporate culture, as you know, there's an internal message, and then there's a corporate culture message to the external, shall we say. So corporate missions and visions provide rallying points and direction for companies in all aspects in operations. So given the unknowns of how companies will embrace the new normal, what can leaders do to modify their corporate cultures to create alignment within their organizations?
Okay, great. So first, when I think about corporate culture, I always think that the biggest component of influencing a culture by far is the leadership in a culture. Oftentimes when individuals in a company will say, oh, our culture sucks, it's kind of a nicer way of saying, if you think about the companies that you worked in where the culture sucks, oftentimes it's, I don't trust the leaders. The leaders suck. And because the leaders, each of you, have such a significant impact on what the culture of the company ultimately is. And I almost consider leadership and the culture of a company as like synonyms in really important ways. In terms of your question, Raphi, around what modifications need to be made, I'll tell you the story of a meetup as it relates to kind of thinking about online events and in-person events, and it could help to understand this. So online events for a very long time were kind of like taboo, shall we say, within Meetup.
Yeah, it was like the third child.
It was definitely like we sometimes we turned a blind eye, and sometimes we really we're strongly against it, because we believe so strongly, as I know you all do, in just the impact and power of in-person. And we hit a crossroads with COVID, and the crossroads was, we're all about in-person. Our corporate culture is all about in-person. We use technology to get people off of technology, not to get people back onto technology. But then we kind of took a step back and we said, okay, what is our mission? What are we here to really do? We're here not to really create in-person. We're here as a company to keep people connected. We're here to facilitate human connections. And the only way to facilitate human connections in a safe way is obviously to do it online. So the goal is not in person. The goal is human connections. The vehicle towards the goal was in person, and now the vehicle towards the goal is online. So my point in giving that story is that it can help you to think about whether you need to modify your kind of corporate culture, mission and vision and values, or whether you need to try to take a step back and say, okay, what were we really trying to accomplish in our mission, vision, and values, and how can we still accomplish the exact same thing, and in fact, not modify it, but keep it the same exact way as it was before, but potentially with different action steps in order to be able to accomplish that. If someone wants later on, then you could ask a question about Meetup's vision, Meetup's values, and our mission and our vision. I'm happy to share that. But rather than me just kind of, forcing the share, I'm happy to wait until a question can potentially come up. Funny, Salem. Around kind of the creation of our mission, vision, and values, and kind of its impact on our corporate culture. And I'm happy to share that screen, but we could also wait for Marty and Raphi to choose the questions that are coming up now. And we have plenty of time. So, just to clear what Marty was asking about, online meetups will continue for sure. Online meetups will continue for sure. There's many important reasons why online meetups enable meetup organizers to be more successful. So in no way, shape, or form should anyone think that they're going to be stopping. We have had, in the last 4 months, we've had barely any in our first 18 years. In the last 4 months, 3.5 months, we've had now 600,000 meetup events scheduled, and 600,000 meetup events scheduled, and over 5-6 million people attending online meetups. So Marcy, don't worry. Marty, Raphi, take it away. Ask any question. I'll just tell you one quick thing, just because Debbie had mentioned that she loves online meetups. So I'll just tell you one thing about them. The beauty of it is that people who live in suburban locations, people who live in rural locations, who can't necessarily get to in person in a city around a topic that they're passionate about. A friend of mine is a parent of ADHD kids. He lives in a more remote area in Canada, and he now can participate in this support group. And it's an amazing experience for him that he could not participate in beforehand. Someone has a very niche specific area and they're really interested in something very specific, they could find that group potentially somewhere else. It may not be in their city, and then maybe they could bring it to their city. So I'll shut up about the benefits of online, but it's going to continue forever. Same reason, Marcy, you said it, all capitals. Raphi and Marty. Even though Marcy, it looks like your cap lock was on by accident.
All right, so it's really important. So one of the things that I've learned about Zoom and this whole corporate culture and everything is that people are forgetting to smile. Like they're letting their guard down. And it is incredible. When you're in a meeting, think back 3 months ago, 4 months ago, we all used to be in our conference rooms and Mr. Smith would be going on and be rolling your eyes. You can no longer roll your eyes and not smile. You have to, I don't know if it's a fake it till you make it thing. So I guess I'm going to lead off with this first thing. So what should we be doing? How should we be more present? And in what ways have you experienced this?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's acceptable for a leader of a meetup group or of a Zoom meeting to say, please show yourself in your camera. No cameras off. I think it's perfectly acceptable. If someone chooses not to, that's fine. But I think as leaders of Zoom, it's very important to ask that everyone turn their cameras on, because it just makes for a far more dynamic experience. And some people are uncomfortable or asking for it. It's okay to ask. Don't force it.
Some people are bald.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anyone like that, but I'm getting there. But I think seeing body language, seeing people's intonations, I think they're really important. The second thing I tend to recommend for kind of Zoom meetings and to avoid, it's sometimes easier to quote unquote, I don't know, either interrupt someone in person in a subtle way or ask them to not talk as long. Like I tend to talk too long, as you can tell. And it's harder via Zoom. So as meetup organizers, there's a value to having a person in your group kind of be the person that is kind of watching out for how much people are talking, who hasn't talked, trying to engage different people in ways that they weren't engaged before. Having another person be a timekeeper, like basically assigning roles within Zoom meetings is really important. More important, I would say, than in-person meetings because of the difficulty and the dynamics that exist within Zoom. So I could go on and on, but those are a couple of thoughts.
I have a question, and it's for you, David. And the question is, if there's one thing that you can point to that you've experienced as a learning process for you during the pandemic and this lockdown, what would it be? What has this horrible situation provided to you that's given you an opportunity to refine the way that you lead or the methodologies that you use to lead, and how does that impact your organization?
So I would say I'm still working on this, to be vulnerable. As we mentioned that earlier, I would say two things. One is, as a leader who's fairly opinionated, like many leaders are, it's very easy when a question comes up to be the first person to give an answer and to give an answer immediately. And I'm definitely working on this, and I think Zoom is helping on this because it's harder sometimes for people on Zoom to jump in, whereas it's easier to actually jump in person.
Yeah.
So I'm being more disciplined about pausing after a question is asked and having other people answer first. And I am hoping that I'll be able to be effective at doing so when it comes back to in-person meetings. But I think that's something that's been a positive of Zoom. And sometimes I even force myself to put myself on mute. Because then it forces you not to answer so quickly and be a little more thoughtful. So Zoom enables the mute capability that you can't necessarily do it in person. It's not pausing, it's my internet. The second kind of learning for me is, wow, when you don't have like an hour and a 15-minute commute each way and you have an extra two and a half hours a day, beautiful things can happen. So I think whatever the goal is that someone has, whether it's exercising more or spending more time with family or writing the book that you always wanted to write, for me, I'm taking certain time in my mornings that I didn't have beforehand to whether it's be more reflective, have more gratitude, but also kind of be more planful kind of about my day. And I'm hoping that will translate into future times as well.
So some questions are coming in the Q&A and in the chat. So yes, what I have noticed, and I've noticed it with Marty and my meetup, we are getting more and more engagement from people that couldn't make it on a Thursday morning into New York City. And it was hard for them to get in, and their kids were acting up, and their nanny didn't arrive, and their husbands had to do this, and their wives had to do that. Everyone had excuses. Now there are fewer excuses. So I will tell you, someone just asked, his name or her name, Janine Lurie, asked, how do we spread the word about our meetups to people outside of our local area?
Yeah, thank you, Janine, for asking that. A couple of thoughts. So the first is, Meetup is integrated with almost every, if not every pretty much every major social media platform out there. So So to the extent when you have a meetup event or on your meetup group and you're able to share it on social and you're able to tag a number of individuals that you think are significant influencers that are outside of your region, do it. Take the time to tag people outside of your areas. If they're meetup organizers in different cities that are organizing topics that are similar to yours. So imagine if you have a mystery novel book club, right? And you're in Kansas City. Well, there could be a mystery novel book club in Manhattan and Brooklyn and other places. Well, if you reached out to the mystery novel book clubs in some of those other areas, then they might be interested, and they probably would be, in doing a co-event together. And you could do co-events with lots of different meetup organizers all around. And it's very easy to find these meetup organizers and meetup groups because you could do searching and from any city and just change the city that you happen to be in. So find those meetup groups, find those meetup organizers, potentially reach out to them and consider doing a joint event together. And then if you do that joint event together, then you could potentially have many different cities that are participating online. And that's thought one. Second thought is we're actually just have rolled out a update to our algorithm specifically in terms of surfacing different meetup events. And our previous algorithm was only geography based, meaning if you're in Kansas City, we'd only see people in Kansas City events. But because of online, we have changed it. And now if you go onto Meetup and you look for events, you will see events that are 100 miles away, 200 miles away, 300 miles away, 500 miles away. You're going to see those events, and we're actually launching those events and prioritizing those events that are particularly popular and have gotten really quality ratings. That's awesome that you grew your group by that significantly, James. Really nice to hear. And we're prioritizing those events because we want to have amazing experiences. So from our own product discovery surface, in terms of when people browse or when people search, they're going to see events that are not in their city. But you can also take specific action, Jade, on finding other people to host and making sure you always share your events on social media platforms, which are not geographic specific, because you share it on Facebook. You know lots of people on Facebook that are outside your areas. Oh my God, there's so many great questions. Next question.
Well, there are a couple of questions that come in. I'm going to kind of summarize them about empathy. And someone referenced that you talked about empathy. There seems to be a couple of people who want to hear more about that, about how is your role as being an empath enhanced as a result of what we've experienced, and how do you plan to use that going forward?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I think many leaders, there's right brain and left brain, type leaders. I unfortunately, shall I say, or fortunately, whatever it is, I am kind of more of the analytical, numbers-based, typically a little more on the rational decision, very rational based decisions. And I think that there's a huge danger to being a leader who over-indexes there, because it means that you're not going to listen effectively and you're not going to really be able to be empathetic. And empathy to me, the definition of it to me, is being able to very easily put your feet in someone else's shoes somehow and be able to understand what that individual is going through and how you want to be treated, not how you want to be treated, but how that person would want to be treated. It's not do unto others how you'd want to be done to yourself, because that's not it. It's do unto others how they would want to be treated, which is really what empathy is about. So I think that because everything that's happening around the world is so scary, appropriately so, for so many people, the need to be much more empathetic and to understand that just because you don't necessarily agree or feel something, the feelings that someone else has, whether it's related to Black Lives Matter, which is so incredibly important, and I would be remiss in not having said that or talked about it today, and the feelings around related to COVID and getting back together are so important that kind of having more humility. I think the key to empathy is humility, having the humility to understand that what's good for you is not necessarily good for most other people. And that's kind of a little bit of more thoughts around empathy.
So David, we only have a couple of minutes left. First of all, I wanted to thank you.
I can go longer. It's okay. We can go 5 minutes extra, and anyone who wants to get off, get off. But we're going to go 5 minutes just to go a little longer. I don't mind.
So I wanted to thank you, first of all, for always being a friend and a participant, a willing participant, an empath, and all these spiritual words that Marty has. Marty, we can see the top of your head. Stop looking at your phone, man. I'm talking about you. So,
I'm listening.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you. That's first of all. And thank you, Marty, for being my partner in all things biz dev. I encouraged people to put into the chat. I'm sorry I didn't do this in the beginning. When we have our other Zoom meetings, we usually encourage people to put your LinkedIn into it. But for this purposes, people should be putting their meetup groups into the chat. And that way we can all know about it. It was like,
and I love it. I'm seeing it happen now as you're saying it, but
Now they're doing it. Right.
please keep sharing it so people could reach out to each other.
yeah, keep doing that. And so with that, in conclusion, in addition to the thank you, I wanted to know, you gave sort of a big reveal saying that you're rolling out a new algorithm, just that people can do more on Meetup. Are there any other big reveals, or do you want to allude to anything coming up in Meetup that you want to announce today, or not yet?
I mean, we last week, or 2 weeks ago, excuse me, 2 weeks ago we rolled out, a huge lot of feature requests around this one, was dark mode for Android, and we're rolling out dark mode for iOS, and there's a huge number of benefits to dark mode, whether it's just saving battery, better visual experience, and kind of that's been an enormous request by many people. But I think the area that I'm most excited about in terms of a product feature that will really significantly impact positively our members and our organizers is our communication tools, and thinking about how our communication tools are today, and thinking about how certain other organizations, whether it's Airbnb or WhatsApp, kind of more chat-based types of functionality where you can have a better insight into who read something, whether it was delivered, whether it was not delivered. To me, I think it has been a pain point for countless meetup organizers. And without giving too much away, what I would say is we're excited about kind of communication tools that we're going to be rolling out. It's an incredibly important request. And the good part about it is that that's so key to effective events and groups. So I'll leave it at that. But you'll see something coming in the future, near future, around that, and kind of a functionality that is more chat driven as opposed to kind of message board type experience.
That sounds great. So I'm good. Thank you very much, David. Marty, my partner in Biz Dev Leaders. That's meetup.com/BizDevLeaders, by the way.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank you, David, for your insights as always. I also just add one thing in my own experience regarding empathy. It's actually a tool that lots of people use to sell, to have their ideas sold. So it's not really just a soft thing to make people feel good. It actually has real value in the business world. If you're looking to sell somebody and you can really, as you say, get their point of view and be in their shoes, you can get much further in your work. So I think that what you touched on is extremely relevant and valuable to us. So thank you so much for your time today, David.
This is great.
I have one last request. One last one. Everybody say cheese for the screenshot. You gotta say cheese. Or something else. Cheese. Linses.
So Lisa, I see you want to stick around, but I don't know if I'm not really, when you're a CEO, you're not really the person in charge. So I'll just tell you, my email address, Lisa and others, is david@meetup.com. Feel free to send me a note about something, and I'm happy to follow up with you. So take care, Lisa as well.
All right, and thank you to Janine for putting this on. To Janine, Alex, Cindy, the whole team, the whole Meetup team.
And by the way, this will be recorded. I saw that last point. We are going to send this out to everyone who RSVP'd. You will get a copy, and there'll be a blog post about it on meetup.com/blog. So if you're not part of meetup.com/blog in our blog group, make sure you get that as well, and you'll get that as a weekly digest, kind of once a week. Janine, anything else, or we're good?
On
We're
mute.
good.
On
I guess
mute.
I'm
All
you,
right.
Janine.
We're all good. All right. Thanks
Thank
again.
you very much, David.
Bye, everyone.
On the
Cheese.
she's on the outgoing.
Okay, cheese.